Um, so my work is completely different to the last two people that you've seen. So I wanted to share with you a project I produced during quarantine, during the early stage of quarantine, called Seclude in the Nude. So like many photographers, I lost all foreseeable bookings in the first 72 hours. I think it was like March 12th. And then all of a sudden I had nothing going on, which was really scary. I think that so many people come to New York to work, and especially, people from other countries and coming from Australia. It was all about being in New York and building my career. And to be in a position where I couldn't work was really scary and destabilizing. So I think for the first 2 weeks of lockdown, I was just like this zombie, trying to deal with the day-to-day kind of horror of living in this apocalyptic New York, and really couldn't get anything done, and not feeling creative and really feeling stunted. But the turning point for me was when I decided to stop reading the news, and I retreated into my creative bubble. And it was doing that I was able to get some space and start creating again.
What inspired you to do this topic?
Okay, so my work studies sexuality and connection in a digital world. So it's really just through taking my morning walks and peering in windows. I was, thinking about like the people and the lives they were living, and how were they connecting with people? Were they lonely? How were they dealing with their sexuality during this time? And so I came up with this idea for Seclude in the Nude, but didn't really know if people would be interested, and I had no idea if I could reach an audience. Would people be okay being photographed naked in their window, and what that would look like? So I kind of just threw myself into it, and I made a post on Instagram. Here it is. And I was inundated with people reaching out to me, wanting to be photographed naked in their windows. And I think that's interesting in itself. It's really fascinating that that's what people were craving. This time of they were craving connection, and not just through the digital world, but connection with another person. And so I began. I really want to read out the quotes, but we might have limited time, so I'm going to have to pick and choose the quotes that I read from. But I think I'm going to start with this one because this was my first photo, and this was also interesting. My first time into Manhattan after a lockdown had started. So I remember being very anxious about this idea of going from Brooklyn to Manhattan at this period of time, and not knowing if it was going to be dangerous, what it was going to look like, and it was really surreal. Driving through the streets of Manhattan and seeing everything shut down. So this is that's kind of the setting for this first photo. I'm just going to read the quote. She says, "I am a sex worker, aerialist, show producer, and determined optimist. Still recovering from shoulder surgery, I now have all the time in the world for physical therapy. Have started cooking again for the first time in nearly 10 years, and have found alternative sources of income through producing weekly virtual cabaret shows instead of my usual sex work, which has come to a screeching halt. Starved for physical social interaction, being naked and semi-public is a way to be seen, to provoke a reaction, and to find a little piece of freedom and rebellion in the confinement of the new normal."
A lot of people are not seeing the screen.
Yeah, the screen is not being shared. I don't mind it because it was a good setup, and I want to see what people are thinking and what they're thinking the photo might look like. But we're not seeing your screen just yet, Kirra.
Were you not seeing?
We're only
not yet. You. That's fine because you're just introducing it, so that's totally fine. But click that share screen button, and then there we go. Now we can see it.
Yep. Oh, there we go. Okay, so there we go. So you can see this. This is my first photo. And yeah, I think that you're going to see a common theme. So a lot of the people that I photographed are burlesque performers and performers, actors, dancers. That's really my community. And when I shared that initial Instagram post, those were the people that, you know, shared the post with their friends. And so in a way, it became this documentation of this very specific community. There's obviously exceptions to that rule, but yeah, it took on kind of like a life of its own. And I think that's a really interesting connection between about starting a project in this digital space and taking it to a real world context. All right.
And are you having contact with them while you're shooting, Kirra?
Yes. So the way I did it was we would exchange information before the shoot, and then I would call them once I was out in front. And then all the direction was done over the phone, which was obviously really challenging. In this photo, you can see that I've lit it from the outside. So I brought some of my own lighting, but often people ask me this all the time. Often they had their own lighting. So I never passed on any additional light sources to anybody. They would have their lighting and I would direct them from the phone, trying to position their lighting in a certain way. So it wasn't
model releases.
Yeah, I have model releases. Also, everyone here is pretty much naked online not in just this example. So everyone's comfortable with nudity.
Right.
So this one was really beautiful. I wanted to read this one out. 6 weeks ago, I sat on my couch with a friend. People we know are going to die, I said. Not even 2 weeks later, my aunt passes. I still can't wrap my head around the idea. Just seeing and hearing the words, they don't make sense to me. Surely it must be a nightmare. I see the people outside without masks, drinking haphazardly in the park without a care in the world. This has greatly changed me. It is our duty to stay inside and protect each other. Yes, it's not ideal to stay inside for months, but at least we can sit on the couch and watch TV. She can't. And I thought that this was really interesting. Both of these people are performers. And there's been a real loss of identity for performers that have kind of molded their entire identity about who they are on stage. So there's been a lot of like mental health problems and that kind of thing. And it's been really hard. I think, you know, hard for performers in particular, hard for so many people for so many different reasons. But a lot of these people work in nightclubs and on the theater, and Broadway's not even coming back till March next year. So a lot of people are starting to go back to work. It's not even really on the horizon for these people. So it's been a really difficult time for them. All right, this is the next one. And we're back in Brooklyn at this stage. And I thought this one was really interesting because you see the different ways that people have coped with COVID. You know, some people, this has just been completely devastating. For other people, they found this new kind of normal that they really like. And so some of the performers have been performing in online Zoom shows. And I myself actually produced 3 Zoom shows with my collaborator, Bubess, a well-known burlesque performer during this time. And for some of them, I think that they've really thrived. You know, the people that have been able to adapt to this new normal have done really well. And I think that as an introvert, you know, I coped with this period of time better than a lot of people. And this is really represented in this quote as well. She says, as a closet introvert, I can admit that transitioning to the new normal may have been easier for myself than the large share of my friends and colleagues, as well as the world at large. Being a full-time gig worker with all my revenue streams being performance related, there have been definitely anxieties about the future for not only artists, but for everyone in general. I'm doing my best to channel that energy into productive artistic outlets as much as I can. But I definitely also have days where I'm not productive at all. It comes in waves. I've been able to find ways to continue performing shows virtually on various online platforms, and as an experience and outlet that I am truly grateful for. I wanted to participate in Seclude in the Nude because I enjoy finding new ways to connect and creating with people to make art together during the quarantine. Also because I like doing anything that includes getting naked. So I think I want to point out that it was like a very surreal experience to most of these people I'd never met before. And I would drive up and we'd get on the phone and we'd talk for a little bit of time, and then I'd ask them to take their clothes off, and they would essentially put on this show. And it was this really beautiful way of connecting with people and for them to express their sexuality in this way. So yeah, I found the whole experience to be very surreal.
So, Kirra,
Yeah.
with the outreach that you made, did you find any people like a regular Joe or a regular Sally who never do this, but all of a sudden needed to do it or wanted to do it? Any of those, particular kinds of people?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to get to a couple of them down the road. It was definitely more of the burlesque performers, just because that's the community that I have, and that's largely my social following. But I had a few people reach out, and it was this like really extreme experience for them. So I'm going to get to that in a little bit.
Okay.
This is one of my favorite photos of the entire piece. I feel how separate they are. It's also a really interesting example of how I use the lighting. So she's lit herself inside with her own lighting. Again, I never passed anything through the window. And then I've used kind of just external light sources just to make the whole scene feel more surreal. As I said, that's how it felt to me. So I kind of wanted to make a visual interpretation of that. And she says, I've lost count of the days and weeks. It's a sad time, but it's often in these dark periods that we have opportunities to experience joy as well. I'm not working now, like many artists. I have no idea what the future looks like. Some days are spent making headway on projects and others are not so productive. And I'm trying to be okay with all of it. But I do love contrast and the conflicting idea of being naked and lit at night, intentionally exhibiting myself to my neighborhood while having a conversation through a closed window on a cell phone with someone I can see on the sidewalk is exactly what this whole experience has felt like. More isolated, more exposed, but also more connected than ever. And so I think that her words are really beautiful and kind of summed up how I was feeling as well. I also, yesterday, I posted a question on Instagram asking my followers what questions they wanted answered tonight. And almost everybody said, what was it? Oh, they were really interested in talking about how the idea of voyeurism through the digital world and the windows being a metaphor for social media. In the same way that we expose ourselves on social media, they were literally exposing themselves in windows. And I think that speaks to our need for connection, and specifically the type of connection that can't be found online. Although I made all these connections with these people within an online world, this felt like this was very much an in-person connection. And that way the project acted like a bridge between the digital world and the real world. And for me, this was the most like honest and vulnerable experience I had through this entire quarantine period. And I really appreciate everyone that volunteered and was able to open themselves up like that. Because it was scary. Like a lot of these people are used to performing within, a theater or a space that's where like nudity is acceptable. But, these photos had to be taken quite quickly because people would pass by and try and take photos and it just wasn't appropriate. So we were both putting ourselves out there in that situation. And I think you can feel that in this photo and her vulnerability.
And what is the end product here? Because obviously it fits perfect for a book. Is it a gallery show? Where do you see yourself going?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I would love to make it into a book. As I said, we're not going to be able to read all the stories, but it reads beautifully. And if anyone wants to read the stories, they're all on my Instagram. So a gallery show would be great. I would love to sell a book as well. I think it's a really great timepiece, like that acts as like this time capsule for the moment as well, and also captures this specific community in Brooklyn.
Yeah, what part of Brooklyn is this?
Oh, I mean, all over. So I was very lucky. Shout out to my husband who drove me around every night. So we actually went out and shot every single night. And I think that it also gave me structure to my days at a time when I was feeling like I had no structure and I didn't know what to do with myself. So I felt like each day, if I could achieve this one thing and go out and get this one photo, then, you know, I will have done something good for the day. You know, like each day wasn't a loss. And despite the fact that we were in shutdown, I was still working on my art and still creating.
Yes, somebody had a great suggestion. Would be a great, amazing editorial story for an independent magazine.
I've had a little bit of press around it, so a few journalists have done pieces on it.
Yeah.
But if anyone has any recommendations, I'm all ears. So I would appreciate it. So Frank, this is an example of someone that's normal and not used to getting their photo taken. She says, I wanted to be a part of your project because I'm a huge fan and I really wanted to do something scary as fuck. Getting on a fire escape, butt-ass naked in 45-degree weather during a viral pandemic seemed like a hell of a time. It was an amazing, memorable experience, and I'd do it again in a heartbeat. And so just to give like a backstory on who Stacey is, Stacey is a mum of 3 and a student in surgical technology. She's been working on the front lines as a unit secretary in the Corona Care unit. And she was, during different periods of time, she had to quarantine from her children and was having this like really intense experience with Corona. But despite it all, I think this was like a really great outlet for her. And I know she was so nervous about it. And I just love that I got to experience and go through that with her. And it was a huge high for her afterwards, which was really cool. So yeah, very interesting. And she thought she looked beautiful. I thought she looked beautiful. It was, yeah, just a really positive experience in a dark time.
So when you got somebody who was normal, is that, you know, like a real, I mean, do you feel the difference shooting that person than shooting a performer?
Oh, absolutely. I think that
let me interrupt you. More time on the phone to get her comfortable?
Yeah. It takes about 3 times as long to get the shot. Okay. Just because, you know, they're not used to posing. They're also bringing a lot of anxiety into the moment. I've photographed so many people nude as part of my work that I have become so desensitized to it. And I have to constantly remind myself that this is a scary experience. Even recently, like I myself was photographed and I hate being in front of the camera. But it was such a good experience for me to remember what it feels like to be in front of the camera and really put yourself out there. So yeah, it takes far, far longer to get the shot. I also really love Stacey as a mom, and her children were just in the other room. So she had stepped out to do this like really like sexy, scary thing while her children were just like existing in the same space. So that was really cool.
And did you give everyone prints? Like how did you compensate them?
So everyone just got high-res copies of the photo. Also, I have been working with a printing company called Shoestring Press, so shout out to them. Lane is my contact there, and he's amazing. He's one of the best people I've met during this
Say the name again.
It's Shoestring Press.
Okay.
And if you go to my Instagram, I will post about them after the show if you need any printing. He's been really amazing. He's also been supporting the protests during this time and printing out posters for everybody. So he's really risen to the occasion. And he offered to print for free for me. And I have been selling the prints from the project and splitting the profits with the performers just to get a little bit of income coming through for people, which has been really nice. And the response has been fantastic, and I know a lot of people are just looking for ways to support, and I appreciate everyone who bought prints.
That's great.
All right. I'm just going to read this one out again because it's so beautiful. It's overwhelming to sit and think about how significant a moment this is for the world. It's completely disarming and an experience that has stripped me down in so many ways. I know people have gotten sick. I have a friend who died. I know what this level of uncertainty feels like in my body. This is an experience that has forced me to pick apart and examine every facet of my life. I have learned the value of routine, intention, and accepting that things can only be taken day by day. The world has changed, and I can't help but be curious about the world we will walk back out into. And I think that's a huge thing for me as well. We're talking about what people talk about, oh, when things go back to normal. And I don't think things are going to go back to normal. I think that we have this entirely new kind of normal. And again, going back to the fact that a lot of these people are performers, they don't know if their job exists in this new normal. And that's completely stabilizing.
It's really interesting that these folks are so profound in their writing as well. I mean, one is better than the other, and one is more stirring than the next. I mean, when they submitted these things to, so is this an interview or what they sent you copy?
No, I would ask them to put together just a short statement talking about their experience during quarantine, how they feel, and why they wanted to be a part of the project. And it's been like, for me, like the photos are good, but it's the statements that I really love, and really tell these micro stories. And as I said, I'm trying to read them out, because when you read them as one entire piece, it really creates a picture of what this experience has been like for this community.
Kirra, this really has to be a book.
Thank you.
Really
yeah.
does. I mean, yeah, and I'm sure you have all this contact information. It could even be very compelling as an art, as a project, just having their voices, as you walk through the gallery. I mean, it's designed that way.
So it's really interesting that you say that. My last project was called The List, and it included extensive interview, and that was the feedback I got about that project, that it would be great to have these audio samples so that people could hear when they look at the photos. And I took that and made the audio samples and realized that it would actually make a great play. So I ended up converting my last project into a play and got into directing. And so it was through comments like that, Frank, that I kind of have this whole other experience with my career, and when really aggressively went off into this direction of directing. So I use photography as kind of my primary art form, and we start with that, and that creates the content, and then I delve into the stories, and then I create kind of nightlife pieces or theater, and more recently I've written a pilot for a series, but it all starts with photography.
Wow.
All right, so this was by far and away the most popular photo of the project. I also think I took it in I think we shot for 10 minutes and we were done, so it was very fast. And as you pointed out, Frank, it is because Kyler is an amazing aerialist performer, and oftentimes they had their own ideas about what their pose wanted to be, what lighting they wanted, and I really loved that. So it really is a collaboration between the two of us, and I respect them as artists and their creative input. And so we had already talked about this photo and what we wanted to look like, so we had a very clear idea of it going into it. So I'm going to read her quote. She said,
Wait, before you read, of the people that you photographed, have you touched any of them? Have you had a coffee with anyone, or has it all been this way?
Some of them, a couple of them I had worked with previously, but I would say 90% of them, I've never had any interaction with them beyond this project.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that will change. I really have built this network and community through doing this project. And I'm doing my best to try and support them as well through print sales and online shows. So it's been this wonderful relationships that I've built. It's kind of hard for me to say. I know that so many people have been struggling during this time, but in many ways, this has been such a time of growth for me, for my work and my photography.
Well, you're a great inspiration. I mean, that you're the perfect person to inspire all of us. This is the situation, and I found a way to make it positive through my art. I mean, that's the dream, right? No matter what's in front of you, you find a way to go around it, underneath it, whatever it takes. That's phenomenal.
Thank you, Frank. I appreciate that. I guess as when we're artists, they're just trying to make ends meet. There's a lot of bullshit we have to do that we don't necessarily enjoy. And going into lockdown, I couldn't do those things, so I could only focus on the things that I love doing. And I was able to aggressively move in that direction for my career. So in many ways, despite the hurt and the fear and the chaos and the anxiety, this has been a positive year for my career. So I don't want to take that away from anyone else's experience, but it's been nice. Okay, I'll read this one. Kyla. I went through a time in my life about 10 years ago where I was done with the abuse of the dance world and didn't quite know who I was as an artist. I created a bunch of art projects that were all about the struggle of figuring out who I was. This pandemic arrived at a time when I felt like I had hit my stride as an artist. I had found my people. I was so excited about the things to come. I can't make work with my performance partner right now. I so miss holding on to her, laughing together while spinning fast in the air. I miss the crowded dressing rooms and spontaneous late night conversations. I'm creating work at home now. I have to. I don't know any other way to exist.
Wow.
And it probably goes back to what you said, Frank. It's, for me, like, I guess this is just how I cope during times of crisis. It's like, I want to make things. Like, it's been comforting for me to be creative and get out there and do this. So this is more like my own way of surviving and coping with the current moment. I can't move this one. Okay, so I shot this twice. Again, I never really knew what I was walking into. So I found this like cool vantage point, but by the time I found the vantage point, it was too late at night. I really wanted to come back and get that glimpse of the city skyline at dusk. So we did that, and I managed to catch the tail end of the train, which was really cool. This is also a beautiful story. I encourage everyone to go to my Instagram and read the stories, but we do have to move on. She is also a part of another photo later down the track. Oh, so this was great. So this is another person that she's not a performer. She's an event designer and florist. And I don't think she was nervous at all. I think, it was really wonderful. And I love that she just presented for me, and I shot her like that. She's not trying to be sexy. She's not trying to show anyone. She was just there presenting. And obviously I feel like the strong part of this image is this cat. I think we were all this cat at one stage with our hand on the glass, like trying to get out. And her expression looking down at the cat, I really love this photo. Again, like, she was lit from inside, I lit it from the outside to kind of create this like surreal feeling that I have about, the moment living in Corona, 2020 in particular, and this experience working with a project was very surreal.
You know what's so nice about these, like, if you read this on a sheet of paper, this is what I want to do, it becomes cookie cutter, one after the other. You haven't allowed that to happen.
Right.
Between the lighting, the angles, all of that is just, each one feels so totally new and fresh.
Yeah, so all my work is a little bit like this. I can only plan to a certain point. And then I get there and kind of had to work with what I've got. But I did try to keep in mind the work as a bigger picture and how each piece would fit into it, and not to try and perpetuate the same ideas again and again. I really love this one. Also, the bars create this like whole jail house thing, which is really nice.
No, you've hit it out of the ballpark, which is great.
Thank you. Talking about, I really felt like a lot of the photos had been from further away, and I wanted more of a portrait really to capture the expression in her face and her eyes. And this happened to be this basement. So it was the perfect photo for this. And I really love the expression on her face. And I think that, conveys how she felt. So this was, she talks about in her quote about wanting to support artists. And that was another huge part of it. The artistic community really came together to support each other and find ways to help each other. Just like tonight, and during these artist talks, it's been really wonderful to feel like you have support during this time. This was crazy. You can't really see it, but she's like 8 floors up and she's like sitting on the edge of her windowsill. So yeah, really, really amazing experience. I don't feel like I was able to like capture exactly how extreme that was. Again, I was working with like limited time periods where I could actually get the photo, and there were quite a few people walking past for this one. But she says, oh, we're going back. Most days are spent alone in the void of isolation, losing track of time on creative projects that have no deadlines in sight. I really love the fact that she talks about this being a void, and I feel like that's represented in the photo. She's sitting in this black void. This idea of having no deadlines was really big for me as well, and I felt like this project gave me structure. So again, like, it was as much about them as it was about me and my way of coping with the current moment.
Yeah, you know, it's something that, just a question. Did you ever think, or was there ever opportunities to go to suburbia?
Yeah, no, not really. Like, no, not really. Everyone was photographed in kind of like Brooklyn, Queens.
Right.
It was during a time when we didn't want to travel too far either. And I was relying on my husband to drive me around. So I was trying to make things more convenient, because he was also studying online during that time. So it was more about, you know, during this time it was really hard to get around, and I didn't want to be catching the train. I didn't feel comfortable catching the train at this time.
Right.
So I was trying to think things more, but you know what, Frank, not a lot of people from the suburbs follow my work.
No, I get that, and I just open that up as a challenge, you know, or just as another idea, you know, what this looks like, you know, in Millburn, New Jersey, you know, what does that look like in, you know, Montclair or
right, and I think that's a
Tacoma?
really good point, and something that I've thought about a lot. I've always talked about the fact that I don't know if it would be possible for me to do my work anywhere but New York, but maybe that's a cop out, you know, maybe, you know, I need to stretch myself and like find different subjects with different life experiences. But again, this was just during this moment, these were the people that reached out to me. I'm going to read this one. I felt like my performance career was just starting to gather momentum when the whole city shut down. But I'm realizing as gig dates come and go, how much of that career was directed by what others wanted to see and not by what I wanted to express. Isolation has renewed access to the deep well of need within me, need waiting to be transformed into image, word, and emotion. I feel lucky to have friends willing to help facilitate that transformation, old friends and new ones like you. So I think, you know, I really did connect with all these people, and it was such a raw and scary time. And for like many of them, this was a positive moment. And I really love that, you know, we were able to do that together.
How many people have you taken? How many images?
I think I've got 22, 25 maybe. I've lost count.
And are you continuing it?
No, well, you know what? If somebody reached out and was like, I really want to be photographed, I'd definitely be open to it. I stopped the project when the protest started because it felt appropriate at the time. I didn't want to share content. I really wanted to give space for the protests. And you know, I was like starting to come to end of that lockdown period when people were like more out and about, and it just didn't seem as relevant anymore. This is one of my favorite images of the entire project. So she is a mime. That's her, and she asked to be in mime outfit, and I think as almost like wearing a mask. This is, you know, she feels stronger in her and more confident in her mime outfit. And you know, when somebody comes to me with a suggestion like that, I often, you know, give the green light, because if it means that much to them, then I'm really interested in seeing that photograph and why they want to be seen that way. And although in some ways she's playing a character, it does really feel real. And I think, you know, given her struggles with mental health during this time, captures what she's feeling inside. So this is a bit of a long one, but I want to read it. I heard about this project from a friend and really wanted to get involved. I'm a professional performance artist based in Brooklyn, and my main passion is mime and movement. Quarantine has been especially hard for me because my passion relies so much on interpersonal communication through nonverbal language. I constantly engage my audience and demand engagement from them. I am following the lockdown guidelines and taking this very seriously, but I have to admit it's been a roller coaster of emotions over the past 7 weeks being stuck inside. I spiral in and out of depression due to the lack of human interaction and the ever-looming uncertainty of my next source of income. Being a performance artist, I'm used to having multiple jobs because losing a gig is part of the entertainment culture. I was always confident that if I ever had no work, I could always fall back on my best skill and passion, mime. It's easy to make rent on the streets of New York City as a mime. It's just long days and hard physical work. But I never imagined I wouldn't be allowed in the streets to perform. I feel like a failure, even though I've spent 10 years using this skill to make people happy and entertained. I'm taking it one day at a time, but the reality is I'm actually stuck in my apartment box in New York City, and I can no longer afford to pay for the box that I'm being told to stay in until it's safe. Ironic, I used to really love the imaginary box because it just feels different when it's tangible and real in quarantine. It was heartbreaking for me to hear that she felt like a failure. I know many artists deal with the fact that you might have success in your career, but it doesn't necessarily translate into a financial figure. And so I really felt for her that during this time, despite success and making a career as an artist, when it all came down to it, she felt like a failure, and that hit home for me. I've spoken to her quite a bit about her experience in quarantine, but I was happy that we were able to sell a couple of her prints and have a tiny bit of money coming in for her. So yeah, as I said, it's, there's kind of no end in sight for these people. While most people are going back to work, they haven't even started talking about nightclubs. I can't even imagine people going back to nightclubs. And even Broadway is talking about March next year. So it's a long slog for them. This is another one I really loved. So we talked about before, I think the first presenters, which was so wonderful, and they talked about, the struggles of people and people complaining about, oh, they couldn't get their nails done, or they couldn't go on trips, and how these are really first world problems. And I know that there were people that understood that, but still felt scared and still felt anxious, and then had all this guilt surrounding the anxiety. Like I should be so grateful, but I'm still scared. And I think that this quote speaks to that. She says, "Honestly, I found myself feeling guilty throughout this experience. I'm lucky enough to continue making a living. I am quarantined with my loving partner and our pets. My family is nearby and we are healthy, and yet I still have bouts of such debilitating anxiety where I can't stop crying or even pick myself up off the bathroom floor. That's when the guilt sets in. How can I even begin to justify these episodes when the reality is that on the surface, I am doing just fine? I've spoken with friends that seem to be having similar feelings, and so I think it's important to try and remind ourselves that pain is relative. There is no definitive sequential hierarchy of pain that says your experience puts you here on this spectrum, and this is how you should feel. All of our feelings are valid, and we deserve to be patient with ourselves. The love and inclusivity of the artistic community during these times has helped keep me grounded and anchored to a universal experience that we are all handling in our own ways. I'm so grateful to all the amazing artists, including Kirra Cheers, that have trusted me with their creative visions during this time. I think a lot of art will come of this."
Wow.
And I remember feeling the same, like I would have during this very first period of lockdown, which seems so long ago. And I know that it's become so normal now. We're all wearing masks and doing the shopping with masks on and working out with masks on. But when it first happened, it was so scary just to go do the shopping. And I'd have days when I'm like, I'm doing great, this is fine, I've adjusted. And then, I'd have days where I'm like, oh God, it's just difficult to get out of bed and continue on. So I felt like that really captured that moment in quarantine. Okay, so this is my co-collaborator, Brew Bess. So I do a lot of writing with her, and we've produced several shows together. And so I took more liberties with her because we already knew each other. This was the second shoot. The first one I had her hanging out of the window completely, and we had a car full of people. stop by and take photos, and Boo yelled at them. It was a whole thing. But I really love her quote, and I think it captures the moment perfectly. She said, "The last day I worked was March 15th. We were halfway through our weekly Sunday night show at Bathtub Gin when the city announced it would be closing bars and restaurants. Will stayed a little too late and drank a little too much, not wanting to leave, knowing it would be a while before we were back together. Like everyone else, we had no idea what was going to happen. After 15 years in New York City, last year I finally reached the goal of making my living solely as an artist. Now I was home and felt like everything I'd built was gone in an instant. Every day was a roller coaster of emotions. The uncertainty of it all was, and still is, gut-wrenching. So many unknowns. But I found a kind of peace, not quite direction, but inspiration and motivation. For the first time since I was a little kid, I didn't really have to do anything for anyone other than what I wanted. I was able to slow down and just listen to my creative instinct. I started playing an instrument every day for the first time since I quit piano in the 8th grade. I started painting again, doodling, cooking long elaborate meals that require lots of chopping, writing scary stories, napping in the sun. Then Kirra called and asked if we would do a virtual show. Then the Slipper Room asked if we would create a show for them, and I remembered that nothing is gone, only evolving. Things will never be the same, but I wanted to believe they'll change for the better. We were all forced into this sudden evolution, and I'm excited to see where it takes us. I miss everyone and can't wait to be back with the people again, but I'm going to miss this quiet moment too." So that's kind of what I talked about, and we work so closely together, so her experience mimics mine in many ways, but having this moment to just work on your art without the distractions of just trying to get by in New York. All right, how are we doing on time, Frank?
Yeah, just let's move it along. You're doing fine. I think
Okay.
everyone, you've got everyone's interest.
Okay.
You're the last one, so take your time. Don't worry about it.
Okay, thank you. All right, this is my favorite photo of the entire series. I think I probably only take 2 or 3 photos I really sit comfortably with me all year, and they're never the ones that other people like. It's always a very deeply personal thing. But I like this one because you really get this insight into her bedroom. She's kind of living every showgirl's dream. And this is her setup that she's been using to perform online shows with. So, and it's not just that, it's this Rubenesque pose that she has going on, and the color contrast between, the aquamarine color I've used to light it and the orange backdrop. And this was also a really beautiful quote that she's got. Let me find this one. So she said, "This experience has been a cycle of emotions. Being an artist, my imagination ran wild at the beginning of this experience. I thought, well, I won't be able to survive New York City without live performance. I'll give myself 6 months and then move home with my parents. Then I went to, I hate online performing. I miss the chemistry of live audience. Then I realized this is going to be a long journey. I need to shift my artistic brain to make art for the small screen. And since then, it's been fun. My bedroom is my recording studio, costume shop, dressing room. There is no way I will be leaving New York City because I can make it. I've been here for almost 18 years, celebrated my 16 years in performance and 9 years being a full-time performer. I have so much to be grateful for, a supportive household, a close-knit community of artists, and friends that live down the block from me. This project directly connects to my art, my personal space, my home. It was also a chance to connect with another human being off a screen." So I spoke before about people, although we were connecting with people in an online world, people still really craved that personal connection, and the project was a bridge for people to connect with somebody in the real world. I also think it shows how important it is to adapt, not just artists, but everyone. We need to adapt to this time to survive. And the people that have been able to do that really well have been quite successful. Obviously, there are so many challenges, and I don't want to be judgmental of anyone because it's not always that easy. But I really loved this photo shoot. Dalinda is a new friend. I love her. We sat outside her window, chatting for a while. If I'd had a bottle of wine, I would have cracked that open and probably drank the entire bottle with her. She was so wonderful. And that's probably why it's one of my favorite photos of the series. So this was this was one of the few photos that I shot. Actually, this was the only one, and I just wasn't sure if it would have the same voyeuristic appeal being out on the fire escape, but I just didn't really have a clear shot of her window. It was quite difficult, so we went with it, and I'm really happy with the image that we ended up getting. She says, connect, create, inspire, adapting for the present moment, sharing my morning practices, teaching classes, taking classes, training, performing, collaborating, finding new ways to live in the now. So again, another example of someone trying to be really positive about the current moment. We shot this one at my friend's photography studio in Sunset. It has really great windows. Interestingly enough, the police turned up and circled the block like 3 times. I think they were just watching. We got quite nervous, but continued on despite of it. And you can see that all in my behind the scenes footage on my Instagram page. I also wanted to, just different from this photo, I wanted to share experience. There's a photo that's missing from the project, and I so dearly wish that I had it. I was photographing a performer on her rooftop, and she works with fire, and she really wanted to do her secluded nude photo with fire. So she had this cauldron of fire, and she was standing on the edge of her rooftop. And I had just started shooting, but hadn't quite got the shot yet, when all of a sudden 3 fire trucks like rounded the corner, and I had this sinking moment when I realized they were there for me. And someone had seen the fire on the rooftop and thought she was a jumper on fire, and called the police and the fire brigade. So I had this like moment of like, I'm standing there like surrounded by like, you know, like 50 firefighters, and me like holding court and trying to explain to them that it was like all for art, and she was still naked on the rooftop. You know, it was such a crazy experience. And during that whole time, all I could think of was like, God, well, like, I really just want the photo now. I wish they would stop talking to me so I could take the photo. But I never got the photo, and it haunts me to this day. But that was the missed opportunity. Please take the time and read this quote separately. So I didn't just photograph women. I was open to everybody, but it was largely women or that reached out to me wanting to be photographed. But this is Joni. He was amazing. We photographed him in Bushwick. He said, my last day of work was March 11th. Since then, most days have been a cycle of different emotions and inner thoughts of happiness, longing, anxiety, fear, but still growth. No art was happening. Now I want to do the arts, and this photo series has inspired me to create. So you can see there's like a trend here. All right, this was another cool photo. She's actually pregnant. And I thought this was something that I really want to read out because, you know, quarantine was scary for everyone, but being pregnant during quarantine, that's an entirely different experience. We're also getting to the end, so there's only a couple more to go. She says, being pregnant in quarantine is something I never thought I'd experience. It's a constant reminder that life indeed does go on. The anxiety and fears are real, but I'm comforted by the thought that I'm not alone. Babies are being born every day, and the excitement and anticipation is growing stronger as my July due date approaches. I wanted to keep performing burlesque on stage as long as I could throughout my pregnancy. That was something I was really looking forward to. I wanted to keep taking ballet classes, rehearse and perform in a modern dance piece in Rochester this month. I wanted to see what this pregnant body could do. I'm still dancing and moving. I can't be stopped. I won't stop because I don't know how. It's what keeps me sane and feeling good. There are other outlets, and it's motivating myself to use them that can be the struggle. So thank you, Kirra, for including me in your series and making me feel like the warrior goddess I long to be. And that's how we photographed her, because I saw her as this warrior goddess. She's super badass. So we photographed her like really empowered on her rooftop. And I think it's a super badass pregnancy photo. You know, she's getting it blown up for her wall and her parents and everything like that. So I was happy that I could be a part of that and capture that image for her. So this is Leige. Again, you know, I work with Leige a lot. She's one of my favorite muses, and so this photo came so easily to me. Again, we shot it very quickly. I used no external lighting. This was all just, I shot it at dusk, hence the blue light. And she had some of her own additional lighting inside. She said, "I chose to see this pandemic as a blessing. Everything happens for a reason, and while devastation and bad news seems to flood us all, I chose to swim in free time. Been out of 9 to 5 since March 15th. I've learned so much about myself. I've decided not to return to my 9 to 5 post-COVID-19 after enrollment in femdom and sex academy courses. I'm thankful for this time. This pandemic forced me to sit alone with myself and face my desire. The lockdown gave me nothing but time to reach it." So yeah, again, mimics my experiences in many ways of just having time to think about what we wanted to do with our lives and how we were going to move forward, and really reiterating again that, you know, there is no going back to normal. You know, I think there's going to be a new normal for so many people. These guys I also work with a lot, so really amazing. Aurora and Fo, fantastic performers. They say, "We are the bottom of our bosoms grateful to be crazy in love team that rides the whole roller coaster together. So during this big dip in the journey, we gained profound appreciation as we channeled our mums. Aurora mustered the energy of goddess medical professional and worked long late night shifts in a COVID unit. Fo put on the apron of wartime wife and waited in long lines for food to make 1 a.m. dinners. We continued to love and laugh and make strong, silly art. And we cried and wondered if anyone will ever again know that we make strong, silly art." Yeah, really beautiful. All right, and this is my final image. So at some point during the project, I posted that I really wanted to do an entire building of people. I didn't know if that was going to be possible, but it was something that I hoped for. Nothing really came about. And then recently, after I'd finished the whole project and thought it was completely done, these guys reached out to me, and a couple of them had been a part of the project before, and they had actually moved in together during quarantine and thought that this might be the right time to take this photo. So I'm going to read this one out to finish off the presentation. "None of us came from the same background, but we bonded over our shared passion for aerial art, performing, creating. We still miss falling onto crash mats and clutching each other with laughter. We miss the feeling of standing backstage, breathing together right before a performance. We miss collaborating on new tricks, lifting each other up with strong limbs and pulleys and shouted encouragements. Now we curl up onto the pillows we've sewed and reassure each other. We shove couches into hallways and dance together for an audience of our pets. We pour our creative energy into our new home, piecing it together from scrap wood and vintage artwork and fragments of our previous lives. It felt important to document this moment of connection and strength while we stare down an uncertain future." And I think that kind of summarizes the project, that this feeling of creativity and community and evolving and finding new ways forward.
So Kirra, what makes you realize that it's time to stop? Because none of this seems like it's tired, like she's got too many images, or between the images and the copy, because the copy is really amazing. Really,
Yeah.
I mean, one helps the other. It's just beautiful. So what makes you, from your creative instinct, say, this is now enough?
I think that it really was the protests. Like we came under curfew, and I couldn't get out, and I didn't want to take up, I was releasing the photos every day and people were following along, but I really didn't want to take up digital space during that time. And then I covered the protests, and it just felt like I had moved on to new things. I also feel like, I'd definitely be open in taking more photos, and I for sure have people volunteering. But I am starting a new project on Friday. That is kind of like very similar to this in many ways. I'm photographing performers in shut down venues all over New York, kind of like sadly performing to empty theater audiences. So it's very much like kind of a sequel to this project. So I just felt like it was time to evolve and move on to new conversations.
It's really wonderful to listen to you talk, because there's a piece of you that sounds so practical.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and which you really, dare I say, with a a screen full of 25 photographers, most photographers aren't so like, like that. It's more scattered. And to hear you, speak in that way is really, it's a beautiful thing to hear. But I have to tell you, what's going on in this chat room for your imagery is just phenomenal.
Oh, thank you. That's so great. I appreciate that.
Really phenomenal. What a terrific project. It's you got a whole bunch of new fans. That I will tell you. We are we're absolutely thrilled. I have to say, just in general, and we can open up the evening to everyone, but this is why Projections got started, for an evening like this, where you have four incredible photographers and collaborators that, just transcend an evening of just beautiful work. It's really awe-inspiring, just great. And you have to, Kirra, you have the invitation when you start your new project and you're done with your new project.
Yeah.
Please come back, and please.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone that wants to follow me on my Instagram, I love reaching out to people and talking. If you have any more questions and want to continue the conversation, please do. I'll always get back to you. So I really like to connect with people in that way.
And how much do you sell prints for?
They're really cheap. So I'm selling prints just for this project in particular. We're selling them for $100 a print.
What size?
It's 12 by 18 inch. And that's because we're getting free printing. We want to try to make the prints affordable for everybody during this time. And I am splitting the costs, the profits with the performers that I photographed as well. So if you want to print, please reach out to me.